launch control active. Here we go. Oh my goodness! 2.78 seconds! Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on this 2023 BMW M8 Competition Coupe. If you were to read BMW's press release that they put out on this car about 12 months ago, they said that it was a new M8. And in fact, they said that there was also a new 8 Series in line with this. But actually what they meant was it was a facelifted car. And even that would have been an exaggeration, because this is the most mild facelifted car I think I've ever reviewed on the channel. And we'll talk about some of those absolute minor changes very soon. Way back in 2018, I was invited out to Spain for the launch of the then brand new 8 Series. The models they had out there were the M850i and the 840D, both really interesting models. The M850i to me was a proper GT car that made all the right sounds. It had enough power, very comfortable and very luxurious. And the 840D kind of retained all of that, lost the V8 soundtrack, but it had the 40D lump in it, which meant it had massive range and was very easy to live with. In fact, I drove a 840D from London to Geneva through the night once, and I couldn't have picked an easier car to do that journey in. And then 12 months later, in 2019, we're flown back out to the same location in Spain for the launch of the brand new M8 Competition Coupe. And I remember being massively impressed with that car, especially in the south of Spain on beautifully smooth and wide roads. It was wonderful, but I did think to myself back then, is there room for this particular model when you already have the M850i? The M850i off memory was around £100,000. The M8 Competition Coupe back then was £123,000 base price. It's gone up a lot since then, and we'll get to the pricing soon. Unfortunately, since those launches, BMW really struggled to sell the 8 Series and the flagship M8, even with some quite hefty dealer contributions or discounts to you and I. You see, when you price a car like this M8 well over £100,000, well, it's then in 911 territory, and most people are going to go for the 911. On top of that, at the beginning of 2021, BMW launched the G82 M4. And aside from its slightly controversial nose, it's pretty much better than the M8 in every single area. And they launched that at just under £80,000. So even if you're a BMW diehard and you didn't like the 911 image, you'd then go for the M4, especially now as that is also offered with the MX drive system. Fast forward to 2023 and an M8 Competition Coupe is going to set you back £139,000, and that is base price. This particular press car retails at £160,000. That's more than an M3 Touring like mine with a few toys in it, and the brand new G87 M2 with carbon seats. I am talking retail prices here, but if you added those two together, they would cost less than one M8 Competition Coupe. But don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful looking car. In fact, I think it's the prettiest car in BMW's current lineup. Thanks to my friends at Car Vertical for sponsoring this video. It's no secret that I think this new M8 Competition Coupe is overpriced. Its biggest problem is depreciation. In fact, in the 2 weeks that I've had this car, it's depreciated about £2,500. But all of that new car depreciation plays into our favour when we're looking on the used market. And earlier on, I found a lovely 12-month-old used and approved example at a main dealership for less than £80,000. And 80 grand for a lightly used one of these, well, that starts to make a lot of sense to me. But remember, if you're looking at a used car, whether it's an M8 or anything else, make sure you use car vertical. Simply put in the car's VIN number or registration number and you'll get sent back a comprehensive report on the car or cars that you're looking at. You'll then be able to look at things like the mileage report. Does it tally up with the advert? Has the car that you're looking at been stolen? Does it have any outstanding finance on it? Because if you buy a car that does, well, let me tell you, it doesn't actually belong to you. It still belongs to the finance company, and that's the last thing you want to do, especially if you're spending 80-odd thousand pounds. Has the car been involved in an accident? If it has, there's a high chance that Car Vertical will have some pictures of it. So if you are looking at buying yourself a used car, don't take a gamble and use Car Vertical. There's a link in the description below. Use Achilles in the checkout to receive 10% off. Support them because they support me, and I don't want you buying an absolute lemon. Under the bonnet, you have the mighty S63, which is a 4.4 litre V8 twin turbo. It's an engine that's been around for many years now, and you find it in cars like the X5M, the X6M, the M5 Competition. But it has just been replaced by the S68, which is the lump that was in that X7 M60i I had on the channel recently. It produces a monstrous 625 horsepower and 750 newton meters of torque. All that power and torque is fed through the very familiar ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox, and it's fed to the ground via BMW's M xDrive system. That gives this near 2-ton coupe a claimed 0 to 62 figure of just 3.2 seconds, and we'll put that to a test shortly. Before we shut the bonnet, I just want to appreciate the attention to detail that's going on under here. Even the lining itself in the bonnet is beautiful. And when you look down here in the engine bay, well, the strut braces are so much nicer than the strut braces that are in cars like the M3 and the M4. You start to see where some of that money has gone. The M8 also has BMW's carbon core, which the previous Shape 7 Series had. Just a shame that that carbon core doesn't seem to have helped the M8 go on any kind of a diet. Jumping in here, well, firstly, it's lovely and cozy. I've got my steering wheel heater on, I've got my seat heating on, which also means that I have my armrest heating on. No word of a lie. In fact, my 7 Series used to have that as well, and it's so nice when it's freezing cold outside to have your elbows and your hands warm. And that's the sort of luxury that you would expect in something costing around the £150,000. The design in here is really nice. It kind of harps back a little bit to the 6 Series for me. 6 Series always had its unique cabin, and I think the 8 Series definitely has that sort of styling and idea as well. When you look at the door cards, I mean, the amount of detail and money that's gone into those alone. Once again, a bit like when you got the bonnet up, there are all these small little details that do start to add up. We've got Alcantara headlining and Alcantara's sun visors, and all of those small details continue into the rear part of the cabin and the rear seats, although you can't really call them rear seats. You'd be lucky to get small children in them. Think of that as extra luggage space or somewhere to put your dog. This is very much a 2+2, just like a 911. But that rear bench does fold flat and give you extended boot space. And the boot is rather large. It looks like it's designed pretty much to put golf clubs in, so very deep. Driving position is good, not brilliant, especially compared to cars like the current M3 and M4 and the incoming G87 M2. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're on the standard sport seats with the now optional carbon buckets that are another £4,000 on top of the price of this car. I'm sure they would drop the driving position a couple of inches. This very latest M8 also has BMW's operating system 7 or iDrive 7 system, as opposed to the iDrive 8, which is in pretty much every single other model. And that's not an issue for me because it means we still retain some of these climate control buttons, etc. down here. But it is strange that BMW's flagship model that costs circa £150,000 has all of the older systems. It's a bit like Rolls-Royce has always inherited the older systems, but at least we know it's tried and tested. And down here, well, this is all very familiar. We have an iDrive controller, we have the lovely leather clad M gear shifter, and then we have M mode and setup mode. And because this is a full fat M car, we have engine adjustment, chassis, steering, brake adjustment, and then the MX drive. So we can be in four-wheel drive sport, where it sends more power and torque to the rear axle, or two-wheel drive, where it sends all of that 625 horsepower from that mighty 4.4 litre V8 twin turbo to the rear axle. I can't see too many M8 owners selecting that. We have a fairly useful storage bin in the center console here with a USB-C socket, a 12-volt socket there as well. And when you open this up, we've got a pair of cup holders, we've got a USB socket and another 12-volt socket down here. And in front of the cup holders, we have a wireless phone charging bay. But something we don't have, that you do get in cars like the current X5M and X6M, are heating and cooling options for your cup holders. I know that's a little bit excessive, but once again, I was hoping that you could at least option that on your flagship M8 competition coupe. First things first, let's test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. BMW say it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.2 seconds. I've got all the traction control devices switched off. I'm in four-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive sport. My race box is ready to go. Left foot is hard down on the brake, right foot on the accelerator, launch control active. Here we go. Oh my goodness! 2.78 seconds! What? You've got to be kidding me! And I feel very lightheaded all of a sudden. Oh wow, head rush. Oh my goodness! I wouldn't say I've been dying to drive this car in the time that I've had it. In fact, the opposite. It's been sitting outside of my house for the past couple of days, completely stationary. Just haven't had the urge or the excitement to get behind the wheel of it. It's almost like I'm revisiting an old friend, and they're just not as fun and as exciting as I remember them being. And I don't know how much of that is to do with the fact that, yes, I've driven some incredible cars over the past 2 or 3 years that have maybe reset that benchmark, but I do remember the M8 having some serious qualities I just haven't managed to find this time around. I remember thinking it would be the ultimate GT car, and with a ride like this one has, I think I was very wrong. I think some of the ride issues in this particular press car are down to the fact that it's on Pirelli P0 tyres. I know I go on MAP tyres a lot on this channel, and I also know that I'm a Michelin brand ambassador, so I might have a little bit of bias in me, but the press cars that I've had in the past, the M8 competition coupes, well, they've all been on Michelin's PS4S tyre, which is fantastic on British roads. It takes the edge off. For those of you long-term viewers, you remember about 2 years ago when I picked up my first G80 M3, well, that was delivered on P0s. And although the P0 gives the M3 and cars like this a really nice turn-in feel because that sidewall is nice and stiff, so the car doesn't compress the tyre, it feels nice and flat. What happens when you hit your favourite British A or B road that's ripply and rough? Well, unfortunately, the tyre doesn't help the suspension, and sometimes it actually goes against the suspension and you end up skipping across the surface or skipping through a corner. When you combine slightly damp conditions like we now have, it's only just started raining, and colder temperatures, well, the car can become quite snappy. Even though this is an MX drive setup. You'd think it would have all the grip in the world and it would sit really well on a good road. It actually is the opposite. It always feels like it wants to spear off into the nearest field when you start pushing this car hard. And I'm adamant that most of that is down to the fact that we're on P0s. And for those of you wondering, I've spent the past 2 weeks in comfort in terms of the chassis or the adaptive M suspension setting. If I move it over to Sport or Sport Plus, well, the car becomes so uncomfortable and wooden. In fact, if I leave it in Sport Plus for too long, I'd be worried that the GoPros are going to snap off their mounts. It's that bad. So if it's not a GT car, because the ride quality isn't brilliant, and I think that's a big aspect of a good GT car. Maybe in some of the rest of Europe, this car wouldn't suffer as much because the roads tend to be a little bit better. Then what is it? Is it a sports car? Is it oozing with feel and driver dynamics? Not really. It's not bad, and we know it is insanely fast. In fact, I've never driven anything this fast. As we know, it will do 2.78 to 60 miles an hour, which is literally mind-bending. It bent my mind earlier on, and yeah, it took me a good 10 minutes to recover from that. So we know it's very fast in a straight line, and we know if conditions improved and temperatures came up and we got some heat into these P0s, it would also handle ballistically well. It would go so fast down one of your favourite roads with not too many issues, providing it wasn't too bumpy. But it's not the sort of car that I would get in anyway and get excited about going down one of my favourite roads on, because it's almost like a teleport car. You get in it, you fly down the road, you get to the other end, and you're not really sure how you got there so quickly and how it did what it did, but you didn't really enjoy much of the journey along the way. Total opposite to something like the Honda Civic Type R, or even my M2 Competition. Probably a good 20 or 30% slower, but you're having at least 50% more fun along the way. So it's not really a GT car, and it's definitely not an exciting driver's car. It's not bad, it's not dull, but it's also just not that exciting and engaging. I don't get out of the driver's seat with a big smile each time. I sometimes get out of the driver's seat with a confused face, wondering how it's just done what it's done. And in these conditions, with the snappy chassis and tyres that we've been talking about, well, sometimes you just about get away with things. In terms of the M8's biggest rivals out there, well, as far as I'm concerned, that would be the Porsche 992 Turbo. Yes, it's a couple of grand more expensive, but it's a Porsche. It's actually even faster in a straight line, and I'm in no doubt that it'll be faster in the bends and probably have better ride quality as well. But the biggest thing that would separate it from this car is depreciation, or lack of, because as we know, pretty much every 911 on sale today holds value so well, and rather than like this car, it almost breaks in half after 12 months. I'm sure your turbo is only going to lose 10 to 15% of its value, and that's obviously going to appeal to a lot of customers. I really think this car's biggest rival is BMW's very own M4 Competition X-Drive. If you can get around its less traditional looks, because I do believe this is a better looking car, and the fact that it doesn't have this absolutely mighty and ballistic V8, which is impossible to replicate with 6 cylinders. If you can get around those two, then the M4 Competition X-Drive is better everywhere. It has a much better chassis, it has better ride quality, it has more feel, it has more space in the cabin. In fact, a lot more. It's not spacious back there in an M4, but at least they're viable seat options for smaller adults, whereas these, as we talked about earlier on, you can only get really small children in there, and that's about it, or a couple of dogs, some luggage. And the boot in the 4 Series or an M4, although by volume I'm not sure if it's any bigger, but it's a lot more usable because the opening is a lot bigger and the rear seats in the M4 fold just like they do here. So really, in my head, you would have to be obsessed with the 8 Series to buy one of these over an M4, especially when you're looking at it costing you about an extra 55 or 60,000 pounds. Let's just push it through here. It just feels so edgy, really does. Understeer, whoa, oversteer. I mean, it is a bit slippery out there, but that wasn't that fast. I've got all the traction aids switched off, and I certainly wasn't expecting that. That was about a third of a throttle out there. I think it was 3rd gear as well. If I'd done half throttle in 2nd gear, I'd have probably ended up in the nearest field. So just see it snappy, and again, that comes down to these P0s. When they're cold, like they are now, they've got 15 degrees of temp in them, they just don't have any grip in the UK, absolutely zero, and it really makes the whole experience a little bit frightening. Unfortunately, I can't see BMW shifting many more 8 Series. The model that made the most sense to me is the 840D, but as we know, politicians and most of Europe seem to really dislike diesel at the moment, and I think if you were to buy one, you'd be a braver man than me. But if you did, well, that car's just incredible. It's quiet and relaxing and fast enough for your autobahn blasts. It will also return close to 50 miles to the gallon and give you a realistic range of 700 miles upwards. So it really is a GT car, and that has a much better ride than this particular M8 competition coupe. And I'm sure you could probably find yourself a used 840D for less than 40 grand. I haven't actually looked, but that's what I'm going to guess. So that would be a really good buy. If you are set on getting one of these, then again, I would suggest that you go down the used route. There's lots of lovely examples out there for less than 100 grand. Or if you wanted a new one, make sure you haggle, because there must be some really impressive deals to be had. I reckon a car like this that has a list price of £159,000, you could probably get it for closer to about 125 grand. That's my guess anyway, that's not factual, but I'm hoping that I'm kind of right. And if you do decide to buy a used car, please remember to use the link in the description to Car Vertical and use the code Achilles to get 10% off. Massive thanks to those guys for sponsoring this video once again, and massive thanks to all of you for hopefully watching and enjoying it. I know it's been a relatively negative review around this car, and I'm not saying that it's poor or bad. I just think there are better cars out there for the same sort of money, and one of those happens to be something that BMW make themselves. Until the next video, take it easy, and I'll see you then. Cheers. Oh my God, it's so cold. Wow. How's it this cold?